Story 1. I had a dream that my childhood dog was coming up the driveway toward my house as I walked down to get home. He looked so young and happy and had a glow about him. I bent down, said hello, and gave him some love. Then I walked home. The next morning I had a gut feeling about that dream. When I got to work, my mother texted me and told me he had passed away the night before. Felt like he was saying goodbye. I will never forget that. Story 2. I know this was a dream, but it has stayed with me my entire life. I was 17, and a 19-year-old friend of mine was dying of cystic fibrosis. He had had a double lung transplant 2 years earlier, and his body was rejecting the lungs. He was in the hospital, actively dying. That night I dreamed I was sitting alone in a crowded room, crying, and no one seemed to care. Finally, a hand touched my shoulder and someone asked what was wrong. I said my friend was dying and it wasn't fair because he was so young and had just gotten his chance at life with the transplant. The person made a noise only my friend could make and said, "Don't worry about me. I'll be all right now." I looked up and it was my friend. We hugged. The dream ended, and I woke up and went to school as usual, convinced he was going to make it. My mom called me during after-school theater practice. My friend had died at about 3 in the morning. She hadn't wanted to tell me before school. To this day, I fully believe my friend came to tell me it was okay before he went. I still miss him. Story 3. My mother died in her hotel room after a family wedding. I was in the next room. For some reason, I became very anxious and sweaty as I tried to sleep. My condition worsened over about 2 hours. Then suddenly I fell asleep. My fitness tracking watch shows my heart rate rising and then suddenly dropping to a normal resting heart rate. When I found her the next morning and the medical examiner arrived, the estimated time of death was approximately the same time my heart rate dropped and I fell asleep. I cannot fully explain the anxiety. It was intense and seemed to come out of nowhere. Story 4. I was walking our dog in the local woods with my 18-year-old son. We walked down a track. The grass and bushes on either side were about 2 feet tall. The dog was sniffing around. I was walking in front and saw a figure on the track. It was about 18 inches tall, with dark hair or fur and wearing tatty rags. Honestly, I did not know what I was looking at. It was human-like. I did not say a word, and it quickly ran to its left into the tall grass and bushes. Then I heard my very startled son cry out, "What on earth was that?" We still mention it often and get goosebumps thinking about it. He is 34 now. I am not saying it was supernatural. A friend said it must have been a member of the woodland fairy folk. Story 5. Okay, so I'm at my high school sports field at night with a buddy. This was around 1983. We were walking along and saw what looked like a party balloon hovering near the stands. We walked over. It was just hovering there, not moving, about 20 feet in the air. We decided to throw rocks at it. When we hit it, we heard a metallic clink. We looked at each other in bewilderment, thinking what the hell. It then started floating away. Slowly it made its way across a playground, staying at the same height. When it reached some trees, it levitated and flew up and over the trees and away. I see my friend every few years and bring it up. He becomes upset because he wants to forget about it. It is strange. Story 6. I was flying somewhere over Alberta, Canada, when the person next to me in the window seat pointed out a strange object in the distance. It was circular and white and had what appeared to be 3 or 4 engines pointing downwards and rotating around the object. The flames from the engines were jet black. It disappeared behind the wing and never reappeared. I asked the pilot as I got off the plane, and he had no idea what I was talking about. I became obsessed for a few weeks, looking at pictures of aircraft, drones, weather balloons, and other objects, and nothing matched what I saw. I am not saying it was aliens, but I saw something very strange. There were about 6 other people who also saw it, so I was not imagining it. Story 7. In the restaurant where I worked, we stored water goblets upside down on trays. The goblet in the center of a tray fell to the floor and broke without knocking over any other goblets. No one was in that room. The entire crew was in the adjacent room. We would have seen anyone enter or leave. Story 8. My grandma and her brother, who lived across the country, had not spoken in over 2 decades. One day she had a sudden urge to call him to make things right and reconnect. She picked up the landline, dialed his number, and put the phone to her ear. There was no ringing, no busy signal, nothing. She said, "Hello?" And he answered, "Hello?" After nearly 25 years of not speaking, they had called each other at exactly the same time. Strangely, he died within 12 hours of that phone call. Story 9. I have a very strong memory of swinging with my birth mother at my school daycare when I was about 5. The thing is, my birth mother died when I was 3, so she could not possibly have been there. I do not believe in religion or an afterlife. I tend to think it was a grieving child with an overactive imagination who wanted her mother and imagined her there. That memory was so strangely vivid that I still cannot shake it. I told my adopted mother, who was my maternal aunt, and my grandmother that she had been there. It had been a while since I had seen her, and I was excited to see her again. That apparently creeped them out a bit. I do not know what I saw that day. Maybe a ghost or a very realistic imaginary friend. The fact that I do not know still makes me wonder sometimes. Story 10. I was working in a group home caring for 5 developmentally disabled, aggressive men. It was about 2 or 3 in the morning and I was in the kitchen cooking. I thought I heard something in the dining room, so I turned and waited for one of the residents to come in. Instead, I felt a presence fill the room. It passed by me and pushed me aside as it moved through the kitchen into the den in the back. There was a lot of very negative energy in that house, so I could see how this might have happened. I have never seen or felt anything like it before or since. Took my breath away, that is for sure. Story 11. A few months ago, I had a dream that I was on a boat and I found my grandfather, who had passed away. I was crying and hugging him. I woke up with my face wet from tears. My mother called that day to say my grandmother was in hospital. She passed away shortly after. The dream was not my grandfather's grief. It was his grief for my grandmother. I remember telling my partner, when I woke up, that I needed to check on them. Story 12. I heard a voice while going through some heavy stuff. I was in the shower at 4 a.m. I do not know if I audibly heard it, but it was overwhelmingly loud in my mind. It said, "Go now," telling me to do something I had decided I would not do. I went and did it, and it changed the entire trajectory of my life in an incredibly positive way. Story 13. My grandmother was hospitalized when I was 15 because an ulcer ruptured in her bowel. She had multiple heart attacks and was placed in a medically induced coma to try to help her heal. We rushed to the city where she lived so my mother could be by her side at the hospital. We received a call around 1 a.m. saying she was not doing well. My mother and my grandfather went to see her again, and I stayed at my grandmother's house. I watched some television and went back to bed about 2 a.m. As I was about to drift off to sleep, I saw my grandmother walk into the room and wave goodbye to me. She looked so happy and healthy. Not even an hour later, my mother woke me to tell me my grandmother had passed away at the same time I had seen her enter the room and say goodbye. Story 14. My parents sold their home after about 25 years of living there. The day before they moved to another state, the woman they had bought the house from came to visit while they packed. She had not seen or spoken to them since selling the house decades earlier, but she said a dream had compelled her to visit. One day later, she would have missed them completely. Your guess is as good as mine. Story 15. I'm autistic, and when I was about 9 years old, I was just starting to get bullied. It was summer, and my diabetic aunt was becoming too ill to stay at home by herself. She was going blind and had a pacemaker, so my grandma and I were responsible for caring for her. I spent the entire summer caring for her every day. She was kind and we grew close mostly because my friends were not. She was always there to listen. Around Thanksgiving, she was hospitalized. She was in the intensive care unit, intubated with kidney failure. I honestly thought she was coming home. We visited her often, and on Thanksgiving we brought her a plate of food. I think I went along, but I have no memory of it. That night I woke up screaming that she had died. I had a vivid dream that she was in the hospital bed. She flatlined, and I floated up to the ceiling with her, looking down on my uncle who was at her bedside. She was covered in rainbows, had rainbow wings, and wore a dress with little white daisies on it. My mom told me I had just had a bad dream and to go back to sleep. My aunt was fine. It was 4 a.m. I woke up at my usual time to a phone call. My aunt died at 4 a.m. She was buried in a nightgown with little white daisies on it. The best I can figure is that it's all a coincidence, or that she died in front of me and I repressed the memory. I regressed and carried around a stuffed animal she had bought me. I also refused to go to school. I was deeply affected by this and became very religious for 3 or 4 years. Story 16. When I was about 13, I was playing video games at a friend's house when I noticed something in the corner of my eye. I turned and saw his television remote floating in the air beside me. When I tried to get my friend's attention, it dropped to the floor. He accused me of lying and tried to explain why it might have fallen. But a plastic grocery bag beside him suddenly began thrashing violently. Without a word, we went outside and played basketball, pretending nothing had happened. Story 17. I saw my grandpa in my living room the night he passed away, even though he was nowhere near the house. Story 18. My workplace used to be an active fort. I worked there for 2 years without any incidents, but in the 3rd year everything changed. There is a heavy, 4-inch thick wooden door that opens and shuts on its own. There is no airflow in the building, and it is usually quite stagnant. Some days the door opens and closes frequently. Other days it does not budge. Some days I feel fine. Other days I am very uncomfortable. I have a couple of videos of the door moving if anyone wants to see them. I just need to figure out how to upload them. Please do not make fun of my commentary. Story 19. I was in high school at a party at a girl's house. I knew her father had taken his own life about a year earlier, but I did not know the details. At the end of the night, there were only a few of us left, and we were all in the living room. A couple of times I saw a shadowy figure out of the corner of my eye walking down the hall toward the bathroom. No one else saw it, but when I mentioned it, she said the bathroom was where they had found her father. It freaked me out, and I still think about it to this day, 30 years later. Story 20. For a while we believed the first house my aunt ever bought was haunted. We would hear people call out names when no one was there and see shadows dart across dark hallways. When my niece was about 3 or 4, she came out of the playroom one day and said, "You know you guys have a ghost, right?" She said his name was Pepper because his face was red like a pepper. This frightened my mother and aunt, so my mother bought some sage and smudged the house. Not more than a few minutes later, the screen door opened by itself twice. This could all be coincidental, but later my aunt did some research and found that there had once been a hospital for burn victims on the land long ago. That could explain why Pepper had a red face. Story 21. My childhood home was a bi-level house. The basement housed our television and Nintendo console. At the bottom of the stairs, before you entered the basement, was the laundry room. My mom did not like us getting up early on Saturday mornings to play video games because we were too loud. One morning we snuck downstairs to play, and when we arrived we thought we saw my mom bent over, grabbing clothes from the dryer. We hurried back upstairs, only to find my mom still sleeping in her bed. To this day we have no explanation. Story 22. I was cleaning out my grandfather's house after he died. There was an extremely heavy piece of metal, probably at least 40 pounds, in the laundry room. They used it to prop the door open. It was always on the floor. One day during the cleanup, we went into the laundry room and the metal had been pushed against the door, so that we had to use our body weight to get it open. I also reached for a plastic bottle on the counter and it felt like it was being held down. I tried to explain both situations as normal earthly events, but I could not. Story 23. In the 1990s, I was in France on a high-speed train traveling east from Paris. We were crossing the countryside, and it was cloudy outside when I noticed a smaller cloud at a lower altitude a few hundred meters from my window. It was strange that it moved at the same speed as the train for several minutes while the train was traveling at 250 kilometers per hour. Eventually, the cloud slowed down and fell behind. Could this be explained by a derecho? Story 24. I was with an ex of mine in my room. We were talking when, clear as day, her dad walked from the living room into the kitchen. My room opened onto the kitchen. We both stopped, looked at each other, and asked what we had just seen. We both said your dad, my dad. Her father had passed away a few weeks earlier. Story 25. I was sitting on my sofa when I suddenly felt an intense pain in my head. Felt as if my head were being inflated and about to explode. I put my head in my hands and, looking down at the floor, saw 3 large ants and a huge roach squirming as if in agony. The pain lasted only a couple of minutes. When it faded, the insects scurried off. For context, I lived in the tropics in a developing country, where insects indoors were a part of life. Story 26. About 8 days before the September 11th attacks, a close relative of mine kept having dreams about planes flying into towers. He described who was behind it, where they came from, and what would happen next if war broke out. The young man was losing sleep, and my mother told him to see a doctor and get sleeping pills. The doctor asked why he needed them, and he described the September 11th attacks in detail. The planes hitting the towers, the deaths of many people, Osama bin Laden, and the mountain region he said they came from. He even said that if war broke out, people would not be able to reach him. The doctor was shocked, but she kept notes, and the young man became the talk of the town because of his premonition. Story 27. Back in 1993, when I was in my teens, I was sick with the flu one night. I insisted my mother go to a concert with her friends. She rarely went out and had planned this annual social event months in advance. I was old enough to take my medicine and sleep on my own. It was just the flu. I suddenly woke up screaming at 3:02 in the morning. She was not home, which seemed impossible with me sick and alone. Our entire family was the 2 of us. I was her whole world, and she was mine. I could not go back to sleep and sat waiting for the phone call. Around 6 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang. It was one of her friends from the concert. I asked if my mother had died and then hung up. Later I learned they had been in a severe car crash at 3:02 in the morning. 1 person was killed, 2 were in a coma, and my mother was hospitalized with 12 broken ribs. I just felt it. What woke me up was chest pain and my mother's voice, not my own scream. I still do not believe in the supernatural. This was not a miracle. Maybe it was a lingering connection from sharing everything in the same body for 40 weeks. Story 28. I had a dream that Sir Terry Pratchett died, and all my friends tried to keep the news from me 2 days before he actually died. I am neither completely skeptical nor wholly superstitious, but I genuinely believe he occupied such an enormous place in the hearts and minds of so many people that when his ship began to set out for the undiscovered country, it created an undertow felt by everyone around the world who loved him. I would not be at all surprised to learn that others had similar dreams at the time. Story 29. The amount of luck involved in a cluster of cells evolving from stardust and multiplying in such a way that I exist at all is incredible. Story 30. Backpacking with my wife in the desert under a full moon. The wind and the rustling of the sand stopped. It became deathly quiet, the kind of silence that raises the hairs and triggers the fight or flight response. Several desert foxes appeared by our tent and stayed nearby. Felt very creepy and made us uneasy. It frightened my wife, so I stayed up all night. When the foxes left, there were no tracks in the rocks or sand. I thought it was fascinating, and then we left. Story 31. A daytime unidentified flying object appeared over a metro area. I do not know what it was and probably never will. It looked like a giant piece of crystal with 2 bright bars inside. It appeared and vanished in less than 30 seconds, as if I had caught it at the right angle for a moment. This happened almost 8 years ago, and I have never seen anything else unusual in the sky. I do some sky watching and photography, day and night. For some reason, I had no urge to take a picture of that object. I just knew it would not show up if I had tried. It was a strange experience, to say the least. Story 32. My father was sitting on the edge of my bed 3 days after his funeral. I was 26. He said he was fine, told me to stop crying, and that death was nothing to be afraid of. It was different from a dream. When I woke, I expected to see him still sitting there. Story 33. One time, after I had a bowel movement, I went to wipe, but there was nothing there. Story 34. My husband and I bought an old house a few years ago. It was cute and traditional, and the previous owner left some furniture. I didn't mind. I actually liked it, and I didn't believe in haunted things. Things started subtly. Doors would slowly creak shut after we left a room, but it was an old house and that seemed normal. Sometimes we heard faint whispers when no one else was home, which I also blamed on the house. Then the piano. I played piano, so I had repaired it, but sometimes late at night a single low C key would depress in the living room. It was loud enough to wake us, a sharp ringing in my ears. We had a priest come to bless the house, and he said there was a heavy presence. That night the piano key pressed again, and this time it was followed by the sound of a chair scraping across the hardwood floor. I was done. We sold the house 6 months later for far less than we paid. Story 35. My father and I drove the same long stretch of road to and from work every day. One winter night, we saw a pickup truck driving slowly about 50 meters ahead. Crested a hill, and when we reached the top, it was gone. There was nowhere to turn off the road. Both sides were fenced grassland. It had simply disappeared. When I was around 9 years old, we were having a family barbecue at dusk when 3 black triangles appeared high in the sky. They stopped moving entirely for about 5 minutes, then accelerated rapidly and made no sound. When my grandfather passed away, a thunderstorm caused a power outage. We had a candle burning in the room, and as he took his last breath, the candle went out. Story 36. My grandmother passed away at home, and I was helping clean her room immediately after. Her favorite reading glasses were on the nightstand under a scarf. When I lifted the scarf, the lenses filled with an intense white light, though we were in a small dim hallway with no direct window light. The light vanished as quickly as it appeared. I felt certain she was letting me know she was okay. Story 37. In middle school, I had a television in my room. It had a red light on the base that was always on. One night, I woke up at about 2 a.m. and found myself sitting on the end of my bed with my eye inches from the red light. It took me about 20 seconds to regain full consciousness and realize where I was and what was happening. I taped a coin over that light after that night. To this day, I am unsure how I taped the coin while I was asleep. Story 38. I was walking home from work around 2010 when I reached a hill and saw some bright lights appear over the top. I assumed it was a car. It seemed to take a few minutes to approach and pass me, but I did not actually see the vehicle. What usually was an hour walk took 4 hours. I think there was a time jump in those lights. Weird. Story 39. I've had many supernatural experiences, but my favorite is about one of my tattoos. My grandfather was a larger-than-life person. He was the family storyteller, a baker, a folk artist, and a fisherman. He had lived a very full life, rising from the gutters to a 52-year marriage, 5 children, and a dozen grandchildren. When his kidneys failed and it became clear he would not be around much longer, we put day-to-day life on hold and stayed by him. We wanted just a few more stories. When he died, we were all devastated. I read at his funeral. He was interred with military honors. He had served in the Navy during the Korean War. A few weeks after the funeral, I dreamed that my grandfather, who had a tattoo of a sea dog, talked to me about getting another tattoo. In the dream, he took me to a tattoo shop and told the tattoo artist, "I'll do it." We had a beautiful conversation while he tattooed my right wrist. I woke up in tears. I saved up and, when I could, got the tattoo from my dream. My original artist canceled, and the available artist had the same initials as my grandfather. He matched my dream exactly. It was my birthday weekend and felt like a final gift from him. I called my younger cousin and told her I had gotten a tattoo for our grandfather and about my dream. She gasped and said, "You had a dream too?" She told me about her own dream in which our grandfather tattooed something very similar on her right shoulder blade. She then said her eldest brother had dreamed as well. We had all gotten the tattoos that weekend without knowing about each other's dreams. All the tattoos have naval themes and each is unique to the grandchild who wears it. I know he is still with us in spirit, watching over us. I miss him every day. Story 40. I had 2 experiences. The first, I drove to a job 1.5 hours away. On the way home, following the same route, I drove away from the job, through a wooded stretch, and suddenly we were 20 minutes from home pulling off the highway. My passenger and I looked at each other, equally bewildered. The mileage and time were correct. Neither of us remembers getting on the highway or even being near it. We only remember driving through the woods and then finding ourselves on an exit ramp. The second, I was driving with a friend to meet my husband and my mother at about 1:30 a.m. We reached the top of a large hill with woods on the left. The entire sky was pitch black. No clouds, no stars, nothing. It was the blackest black I had ever seen. Then, above the trees on the left, 3 red lights appeared. They were not normal lights. There was no visible beam. The red was a bright patch without illumination around it. Then it vanished. We both looked at each other and asked, "Did you see that?" I still look up every time I pass that section of woods on top of the hill. This happened in the countryside, so there was nothing around except a small village below the hill, fields, and woods. Story 41. My father was in hospice care, dying and drifting in and out of consciousness. For many years he had been nearly deaf without his hearing aids, which had somehow disappeared. When he woke up, he could suddenly hear perfectly. Story 42. At age 8 or 9, I woke up in my room one morning and saw my closet door opened by itself. I screamed in horror for my parents, who got out of bed and rushed in. They brushed it off as a nightmare, but I was wide awake when it happened. My best guess is that I hallucinated. Story 43. I shared this on another forum before. A couple of years ago, my wife and I experienced strange phenomena in our house for a time. A friend's daughter was staying over, and we heard a distinctive knock on our bedroom door. That happened a few more times. Once I thought my wife was in the other room. I asked a question and heard a response. Moments later, I walked downstairs and found her sitting at the kitchen table. She had not been upstairs at all. Another time I was walking toward our house and saw my sister-in-law enter through the front door. After I went inside and put my things down, my wife and her sister entered a few minutes later. I had not known she was visiting, and she was wearing the same clothes I had seen her wear when she entered. Neither of us is religious or believes in the paranormal, but it reached a point where I seriously considered contacting paranormal investigators. Story 44. I went to a medium a few years ago. My friend had died the year before, and I wanted to talk to her. As soon as I entered the room, I felt her hand on my right shoulder, and it never left me until I left the room. She spoke through the medium and shared information only she would have known. It was comforting and also sad and emotional. I did not stop crying that entire evening. I know she watches over her daughter and family, but I was so grateful she came to see me. Story 45. In 5th grade, I stayed overnight at a friend's house. It was well after sunset, and we were playing in the basement. The other 2 girls went upstairs, but I stayed downstairs, looking through the rooms out of curiosity. Suddenly, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A green, translucent woman in a flowing gown stood there. I stared at her for a few seconds in shock. I looked away, and when I looked back, she was gone. Story 46. One time in the house I grew up in, I was watching a movie and fooling around with my girlfriend at the time in the basement. My parents were hours away for the weekend with my little brother at a hockey tournament. All of a sudden, we heard heavy boot steps upstairs, walking from one end of the house to the other. My girlfriend confirmed she heard it too and immediately asked who was home. No one had pulled into the driveway, and my parents always used the big old side door, which made a lot of noise. No one had come in that way. Freaked out, I grabbed a knife and searched the whole house. All doors and windows were closed and locked, nothing disturbed, and there were no traces of anyone. No one else was home, so what did we hear? It was not the only creepy thing that happened in that house, but it was definitely one of the more memorable. Story 47. I had a glass crucifix break in half in my hands when I was a kid. I was playing and doing a fake cleansing of our new house, walking around holding it up and banishing bad spirits. It was not a crazy old house. It was built in the 1970s, but that was definitely weird. Story 48. The week after my mother died, I had a vivid dream of her getting my brother and me into a car and having the most heartfelt talk about how she loved us and was so proud. Then she turned to mist and floated up into the sky. I woke feeling as though she had come to assure us that she was well. I had a similar vivid dream after my little sister died suddenly at age 40. My grief was debilitating after that senseless death, but I felt reassured that she had come to my dreams to tell me she was okay and not to be sad. I have never had such real dreams at any other time. Story 49. I played with a Ouija board. Several unexplainable things occurred. For example, it guessed the outcome of 20 coin tosses in a row and spelled words in a language that only another person in the room spoke, and that person had not touched the board. I was one of the people playing and could barely speak only a few words, so I believed it was legitimate. Story 50. Throwaway account because it's very personal. After attempting suicide and surviving, I decided to go to the emergency department to get help. After undergoing many tests to make sure I had not done any permanent damage, I was sent to a post-emergency mental health unit. My status as a patient was unusual because I was voluntarily committing myself. I could leave if I asked, and I told the doctors that I did not want to take any medication until I had a proper diagnosis. I thought this was important because I was not under the influence of any drugs. There were only a few patients waiting to be transferred elsewhere. All were there for different reasons, but one was peculiar. He was an old man who believed he was God. The other patients mostly ignored him because he always rambled about religion and had missing teeth, which made him hard to understand. I liked to know why the other patients were there, so I listened to his stories. He was actually quite knowledgeable about the Bible, even though he claimed it was often misunderstood. According to him, he had somehow lost his powers and was trapped in a human existence. He believed the world was going to ruin and that he would fix everything once he managed to get his powers back. He was sad to be stuck because he said he wanted to help us. He had a small ritual. Every morning he waited for the sun to come up. When it did, he closed his eyes, went down on his knees, and bathed in the sun. He said he needed to get his light back from the sun so he could return to the sky and be God again. One day we were the only two in the break room watching television. He was rambling again. I could barely understand him because of his missing teeth. He was depressed because it was a cloudy winter day and he could not see the sun. He talked to me but did not really look at me, just watched the news. He complained about the state of the world and how he wished he could bring justice. He wanted to help those who did good and punish those who did bad. I was very lost and hated myself, so I asked him, "Which one am I?" Then he turned toward me and looked like someone completely different. He was looking at me and no longer cared about the television. Behind him there was a window, and at the very moment he started speaking to me, the sun became visible. The lighting was so perfect that he had a halo of light behind his head. He looked completely different, like an angel in a painting. He simply told me with perfect pronunciation, "You are good." At the exact moment he stopped speaking, the sun slipped behind the clouds. I did not see it again that day. He then continued to watch television as if nothing had happened. I knew this did not sound like much, but everything felt surreal for a brief moment. It really felt like God, or one of his angels, was speaking directly to me. I was agnostic and had never cared much about religion. I did not really believe in the supernatural. Everything could be explained by coincidence. Someone understanding I was in pain and the sun appearing at the right moment. But it all felt so perfect. He said exactly what I needed to hear. The light hit at the perfect angle, and he looked like a completely different person. I wanted to believe he was right, that there is a God or something beyond our understanding that wants to help. Maybe it was him, or maybe something spoke through him. Either way, it helped me. Story 51. Not a hunter, but growing up in Wisconsin, I was in the minority. Growing up in the woods, I was connected with the earth, nature, and animals. I knew from a very young age I was not alone in the woods. Having free rein at 8 years old, I explored my world and was not afraid of it. It was not uncommon to cross paths with deer, bears, coyotes, wolves, and even a mountain lion once. Usually by myself on my bike or on cross-country skis, a bear, deer, or coyote would be on the trail. I would stop, watch quietly, and wait until they moved on. More than a handful of times we locked eye contact and simply shared the woods together. Even today, it remains one of my favorite experiences. Fast forward to my late 20s. My future wife and I lived on 212 acres of forest with an open field, and we gave my wife's old friend permission to hunt the land. His new wife was pregnant. He was hunting a deer to feed his family. His philosophy was to use the most powerful, accurate rifle to make the cleanest, most humane shot possible. He invited me to join him on his hunt. I had never hunted, but I thought it would be wise to learn how to gut and clean an animal in case I ever needed to feed my family. So I agreed, and we hiked to a good spot before dawn. I let my friend do his thing and followed silently about 10 yards behind him. He found a spot near a tree stump, told me to stay behind him, and said the hunt could take all day. I stood back about 10 yards, closed my eyes, and in my mind's eye I connected with the land. I called out and invited the deer that had been born to feed my friend, his wife, and their soon-to-be-born baby. Immediately, in my mind's eye, a deer appeared, so real and vivid, standing there. As in many childhood moments, I communed with the deer. I thanked it for giving its life, for the sustenance that would feed their baby and help it grow. I felt profound honor and respect for the life offered. It was intensely real. When I opened my eyes, the deer from my vision was standing 10 yards in front of me, looking me in the eyes. I whispered, "Pest, there's a deer over here." He turned on his stump, took aim, and made one clean shot through the heart. He said it was the easiest hunt he'd ever had. We'd been there maybe 10 minutes. It was one of the most beautiful experiences of communing with nature I have ever had. Story 52. I moved small objects with my mind as I entered puberty. It lasted only a few months. I could make pencils or pieces of paper tremble or roll slightly. Story 53. Several years ago, I woke to what I can only describe as a robotic voice. It began as a buzzing sound from an electronic alarm clock I do not own, and the buzz morphed into a voice that said, "Baby boy." The strangest part is that it happened twice within a couple of weeks, and when it occurred the second time, exactly as before, I remembered the first episode. Around that time, I had another, even more unusual experience. I woke 3 times in one night, and each time it was exactly the same time. Each time I checked my phone, it read 3:20 in the morning. Story 54. There was a Chinese floating lantern slowly drifting over the buildings of my old housing complex in Illinois. As a chaotic 11-year-old, I ran inside to get a baseball and tried to knock it out of the sky. When it passed over me, I realized it looked like a giant ball of red, fiery plasma about half the size of a car. I threw the baseball twice and recorded it with my 2009 phone, but in the video it appeared white like a street lamp. Story 55. When I was a teenager, there was a rural intersection. At the center it felt warm, but each road leading into it was colder. You could feel the temperature drop as soon as you walked in. There was a rumor that a few children heading to school had been killed by a truck and that their spirits lingered. While my friends and I were investigating, we found a handprint on the back of a car. Story 56. I had to log into my account to share this story. My grandmother was my adoptive mother. My biological mother did not care for me, so my grandmother took me in and raised me. We went through harsh times and good times, but overall it was a good relationship. During the coronavirus pandemic, I was not speaking with her much. She had fought with my wife, and I told her I would not pick a side and would not force anything, so I focused on my life. I received notice that she had contracted the coronavirus, reportedly from her sons, and because she had been a lifelong smoker, it could be serious. She eventually died, and I was not able to contact or see her because the pandemic was ongoing and I had a young child and did not want to risk exposure. My adoptive mother died without my having spoken to her. The news was framed as a kind of relief because she was very religious and longed to meet her God. One night I had a dream. I was sitting at my old home and she was with me, wearing the same clothes she wore almost every day. I could feel her nearby and saw that she was at peace, but I became very upset. I immediately began speaking and crying, saying that I had not been able to see her one last time and that I could not thank her enough for taking care of me. Then she took my hand and said the following: I was permitted to say three things. Take care of your wife. You will have great things coming to you in the near future. I died knowing how much you loved me. The dream ended abruptly and I woke up. I screamed and cried and told my wife everything. She is very spiritual while I am more rational. She listened, understood, and said nothing. 1 month later, I received a promotion and my salary tripled. My wife had health issues that required intensive care, but she survived. Through my uncle, I learned that the last thing my adoptive mother said was that she knew I loved her and that she wanted to leave the hospital to visit me. My uncle did not know about the dream and still does not. Powerful stuff. I have not dreamed about my adoptive mother since then. Story 57. I saw a large black triangular aircraft once. I am not sure what it was. It was possibly classified military technology. Story 58. Answered prayers. I am not religious but figured if it works, it will work. Story 59. The door to my parents' house opened on its own. It was unlocked, and the doorknob had turned. It was probably the neighbor's kid on the second floor playing a prank, though. Story 60. I grew up in a 120-year-old house whose previous owner, Minerva, died in my bedroom. She was the second owner of the house. My parents are the third. I stayed up late on a Saturday in high school, as one does, from where I was sitting on my couch watching television. The east side of my home was on my left and ran 45 feet south to the rear in a continuous wall. My house also sits on a 3-foot foundation wall because of a crawl space. 7 feet up the wall inside is actually 10 feet above ground outside. At 3 or 4 in the morning, I heard knocking in perfect time, band geek timing, roughly 7 feet above the floor. The knocking traveled the length of the east wall and ended with the knocking coming from my bedroom on the other side of the house. About 12 knocks in total. My immediate thought was that the house was settling, but there was no way it could settle in perfect time and make identical sounds. Besides, it would have been 10 feet off the ground outside, so unless Yao Ming was outside my house, it was not a person. I checked. I told my brother the next morning and he did not believe me, that is until he awoke one morning, asked how many knocks I had heard, and said he had heard the exact same thing. I have no idea what it was to this day. It remains a true mystery. Story 61. I woke up from a dream about a huge fire. A few hours later, my parents called to tell me their house had caught fire overnight. Story 62. Driving to work early one morning, I noticed an almost cloud-like fog the size of a person floating from the left curb about 40 feet ahead in front of me. I assumed it was a puff of exhaust from someone starting their car. As I drove closer, there were no cars around. I drove directly through it. Looking in the rearview mirror, I noticed that although I had driven through it, it did not change shape or trajectory. It continued to move straight across the street and disappeared as soon as it reached the curb on the other side of the road. To this day, I cannot explain it. Story 63. This one has some backstory. When I first met my ex-husband, he lived in an old house from the 1970s, deep in the county, about 30 minutes from the nearest town. I had a borzoi at the time and he would always bark aggressively in one particular area of the yard, around the right front end of the house. That was unnerving because borzoi generally do not bark. I had only heard him bark 3 or 4 times before that. There was always a noise in the house that sounded like keys jingling or a dog's collar when it shakes, but it never came from the same room. Sometimes it was across the house, sometimes it was in the same room as me. It was not my dog because sometimes he was in the room with me and it intrigued him too. One night my ex-husband went outside to get something and he heard a noise he described as a garden hose set to shower aimed at the ground in the area my dog always barked. He went to see and there was nothing, but the sound was clear as day, as if someone were watering the grass right in front of him. Then the noise started moving. It traced the perimeter of the house. He followed it until it got halfway around. Then it suddenly took off very fast toward the woods at the back of the property. About a month later, I was lying in bed and my dog walked into the room. His gaze shifted from me to the area between the bed and the nightstand and his posture became defensive. Head forward, lips tight, stiff as a board. I looked where he was looking and saw nothing. He crept forward and growled, eyes wild as if he were about to attack. I did not like that because borzoi are very cat-like. They only turn aggressive if personally threatened or spooked. Then he sprang forward and started snapping at the air while growling, like trying to grab an invisible person. A couple of months ago, my ex and I were lying in bed. The room was dark and he was sound asleep. Suddenly, he jolted awake, making panicked noises and flailing like he was trying to fling something off of him. I asked if he was okay. There was no answer. He was breathing heavily and looking around. I asked what was going on and he still did not respond, but now I noticed he was staring at something just off the edge of the bed beside him. I followed his gaze and right in the corner where the nightstand met his side of the bed, there was a whole human face. At first I thought my ex had frozen because of a home invasion and someone had a weapon to him, but then I realized the face was not real. I do not know how to describe it. I could see it, but it was like looking at your face in the reflection of a phone screen. There was not much color to it and something was off about its three-dimensionality and opacity. Also, there was no body or neck. It was literally just a head and face positioned as if someone invisible, without a head, were kneeling beside the bed watching us. I stared in silent shock over my ex's shoulder for probably 30 seconds. I was too scared to blink. Eventually, I threw the blanket over my head, curled into a ball, and moved to the corner of the bed furthest from the face. My ex realized then that I had seen it too and bolted up to get the light, but it vanished in the dark. It has been nearly a decade, but I can still remember it so vividly that I could 110% pick him out of a crowd. He was maybe 45 with long, dark, straight hair that was kind of messy and a wide bandana around his forehead. He looked somewhat Native American. He had a long, skinny face with prominent cheekbones, no facial hair, and almond-shaped dark eyes. Story 64. I was sledding with some friends one day. As I reached the bottom of the hill, I had an absolutely terrible feeling that lasted all day. A few days later, I went sledding on the same hill. I lived in a small town in the woods with about 5 feet of snow. As I neared the bottom of the hill, I saw someone watching me from behind a tree. When I tried to talk to them, they stayed silent, and after a few tense seconds, they were gone. I told my friends, and we went to the same tree where I had seen the person, but there were no footprints, nothing. My friends thought I was trying to scare them, but I was not. Months passed and the snow started to melt. A person walking a dog near the bottom of the hill had the dog run off and return with a human arm. It turned out a man had been murdered in the area and his body had been left there. Story 65. My mother hired someone to burn sage in our house when I was 11. The next morning I woke to find the telescope that had been in my bedroom on my bed. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.